we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast, hit us up on our Instagram or Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast or at the Bigmark Pod. Hit up our DMs there. Let us know a topic. Let us know what you think about the podcast. Anything like that. We're always open there. Check out our Patreon. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribing to the channel. And again, thank you always thank you all for being here and taking the time to listen to me go on and do my thing. Because you know what? I love doing it, and I do it because it's fun, and I like talking about all this cool shit. And anyone who doesn't like this or thinks it's a weird fucking grab, what kind of grab is it? You know what I'm saying? Like, we're talking, this is the Giannis Pappas idea of the podcast about the podcast. He talked about it on his podcast, History Hyenas, with Tim Dillon and Chrissy DiStefano, and they said, one day there will be a podcast about a podcast. Maybe it's not about all things, but I've done a bunch of episodes now. And I've done a bunch of episodes about people. And yeah, I guess I titled the episode by their name. But it's not like they're going to be on the show. I mean, yeah, I've had guests on and then that's the title of the show. But like, what am I supposed to say? Like, the life of fucking Shane Gillis? I guess the thumbnail's not big enough. So it's in the description. I always say, hey, talking about the person, not talking to. So read the descriptions, everyone. The reason I'm going on my little tirade here is because the last time I talked about one of the members of the podcast, I'm actually going to talk about today one of the hosts. I got a seething comment about, I can't even remember now, but something about like desperate for attention or something like that. But you can go check it out on the YouTubes if you like. Solid. The only way you can appreciate it is by appreciating it. But anyway, I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there because, again, for some reason, and I've had to do this on other episodes, for some reason you think I'm actually going to have these guys, and we'll see what happens today because it's called Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Love the podcast. But that one particular fan, not my favorite guy. But what can you do? If you got the time, I appreciate the listening. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. Like I always say, to you, my loyal listeners, as well as that gentleman. I love y'all. And again, I don't actually have Matt and Shane in the building tonight. Unfortunately, I wish I did. But again, I want to talk about Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. It's been around for a while. We're well into the 400s. I think they're up to 460. I wonder the exact number they're at right now. But they've been around for a few years now, and Matt and Shane are both comedians. They're up to 484 episodes so far. Not all of them are available. I think if you get in their Patreon, you can get some of the older episodes, but they put a lot of them behind a paywall or just deleted them completely because of some controversy, which we will get into shortly. But I've just kind of started recently listening to them because of the rise in popularity of Shane Gillis. He kind of came to light or came across most people's radar in maybe not the best way, but hey, any press is good press, and in Shane Gillis's case, it definitely is. So, I kind of started going back into the episodes, and this is kind of how I've always wanted to watch podcasts, and I desperately tried to do it with Joe Rogan, but he just had so many episodes by the time I started listening to it, it was just impossible to go through all of his fucking episodes. I went through a lot of the early ones, and skipped over quite a few, trust me, but there's like at least 1,000 when I started watching Joe Rogan. I think he might even be into the 3,000s now. I'm not sure. But that's not what we're talking about tonight. But again, I usually like to kind of go back and watch as many episodes as I can of the podcast, right? Like, yeah, maybe they're maybe more podcasts get more topical, but you know, when I first started listening to History Hyenas that I mentioned before, I went back and listened to all their podcasts, and it gave me a chance to kind of like catch up to things, and they were still making new episodes as I was watching the old ones, and which is basically happening right now as I'm watching Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. And I don't know what is compelling me. Maybe it's just been some of the guest episodes I've saw weren't the best. I think maybe as the podcast has gone on, because I'm like I said, there's 484 episodes so far. I'm like, I think 420, maybe 421, something around there right now. So I'm not quite caught up. But a lot of the episode, they may have changed their style up, because a lot of the episodes I've seen with guests is just not my bag. I find that depending on the guest, Matt and Shane kind of change it up a little bit. And don't get me wrong, I've seen a lot of awesome clips from the podcast of them having great guests, and again, them it being really funny. But there's something about just the two of them, the chemistry there, that I absolutely love. And I think there's something really important, or something really cool, I should say, not important, but there's something really cool, I think, about podcasts where you just have two guys. Again, I'm a big History Hyenas fan, and Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast is kind of a little bit of that same vibe where you get two guys that are friends, and they have an awesome chemistry together, and they're bouncing ideas, and they're going with bits. Again, that's kind of what most podcasts are, especially comedian podcasts, or comedy podcasts, as you say, that are run by comedians. You know, they tend to kind of be that more riffing style, the yes and improv, because that's what keeps the podcast going. You can't just be sitting there going like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, when you're trying to make, when one of the hosts is trying to make a joke and the other one is stonewalling him, no chance that podcast can be any good. So there's a lot of things that I think gets lost when you do, again, look at me, look with the solo episodes, right? Like, they're great, but I kind of have to do all the washing and drying. And it's funny, actually, I don't know if anyone would ever be able to find any of these videos, because I think they just live on Facebook. But me and my buddy Nick from high school literally did like a internet show, if you will, in our physics class in grade 11. And like one of our buddies, Eric, would film it on his like little digital camera, and Nick and I would just completely riff, very minimal, almost no like script or setup to the show. We just kind of come up with like the first line before the camera started rolling, and then just go from there. Again, it was called Mark and Nick Go to Physics. And the premise was always how we got to physics class, and it just came up with some bullshit, 100% bullshit on the way, and just like ran into all these people and did all these different adventures, and again, just surrealist bullshit, but purely off the cuff, just yes and yes and yes and. And I really learned in doing that, like, you know, it doesn't really matter what is being said, but as long as you're going with it and moving the plot forward, like, I've watched some of these episodes. I mean, I remember these episodes, and there'd just be times where one of us would be just going, "Yep, yep, that happened." Like, you're just like pushing the other guy, and like then you riff off each other, right? So, you know, I wish I was able to do that with someone on a more regular basis. Like, it's a lot harder to do that with everyone's schedule, but damn, that would be fun. So I think Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, really, that's one of the things that keeps me going. And that's why I focus on just the episodes with Matt and Shane. It'll also give me an opportunity to go back and watch other old episodes with guests eventually. But a lot of the old episodes anyway, it's, you know, it's a different mindset that I feel the guys are in. Like, they just kind of like not themselves, not as carefree, more trying to play to the guests, and that's natural. I'm not holding that against them, right? Like, obviously when you have a guest and when you're used to dealing with just another person one-on-one and a guest or two guests come into the mix, it becomes a group, and then there's different dynamics there, and there's different inside jokes and all types of shit. So again, that's why, but I've been going back and watching all the old episodes and getting caught up. So really interested in that. Again, two hosts, Shane Gillis, Matt McCusker. I did do a full episode on Shane Gillis, like I mentioned before, which I got some heat from. No, I'm just joking. I don't give a fuck. I'm not bitter. No, I'm just joking. But I did a podcast on Shane Gillis, so you should go check that out. But yes, rising star, amazing things happening for him. Really, really funny guy. And I think, again, I don't want to make claims like things are changing, but there are times where I feel like our culture and Hollywood or whatever, the sphere of entertainment will propel someone into stardom based fully on merit. And I believe that's happening with Shane Gillis. Like, he is a funny guy, and yeah, he says some stuff that is questionable in certain contexts, but under the guise of comedy, he really, he really lives on the edge, if you will. He's wild, whatever it is, but he's kind of trying to rewrite things a little bit as far as what's acceptable and what is funny and what a lot of people think is funny. Majority of people think is funny. Yes, obviously there's going to be a lot of people that are offended by some jokes, like truly offended. That's unfortunate, but we should not say no jokes are allowed just because some people get offended. Yes, there are jokes where almost all people get offended, and no one will laugh at those, and those suck, and those comedians shouldn't be propelled into the spotlight. Yeah, I know we live in a time where entertainment is pretty decentralized, and you can support people with Patreon. Check out patreon.com/Bigmark podcast. Anyway, but you can support some of these people who wouldn't necessarily make it very far if they have kind of crazy jokes and crazy politics, but someone's gonna think that their shit is funny. And that's the weird thing about comedy, is that if your intention is for it to be funny, it's not a fact. Jokes are not facts. And when we treat jokes like facts, like someone saying something that they truly believe to be a fact, or they're acting as though it is a fact, that's something you can judge people's character. That's something that someone should be held accountable to and held responsible for what they said. But under the guise of comedy, trying to make people funny, sometimes you have to push boundaries. Sometimes you have to say things that are arguably offensive, but that's what makes them funny, because you're saying them in a context that you shouldn't be saying. It's funny, the context, the situation is funny, the audacity and the recklessness of you saying that is funny, right? It's like farting, right? Like it's impolite, but there's just something fucking funny about it. And that's the problem, again, that I think Shane Gillis has kind of found himself in and starting to rise above, which we'll get into a little bit more. But Matt McCusker himself, it's actually kind of funny. I was looking into Matt's stuff a little bit more. He's not quite as front and center in the spotlight as Shane is. And it was kind of hard to find some of his info. I kind of found this like weird ass article about, I'm not even 100% sure how true all of this stuff is, but he's a Pennsylvania native, which is actually another thing that actually draws me to, I think, Matt and Shane's secret podcast. And there's another thing that drew me to Histrionians, in fact, is their accents. I think Matt and Shane's accents are hilarious. They're like Pennsylvania, go home and get some water and, phone and do all that fucking Pennsylvania shit, and you go Eagles and, whoa, yeah, fucking wild. It's a different accent, but it's funny to hear. Again, Matt is also a stand-up, like I've mentioned before. And former drug dealer, it seems, or at least had some serious dealings in drug trade, and is kind of like a reformed dude, married, has kids, all that stuff. But, just kind of seems like he had a little bit of a sketchy past, and who doesn't? No. They did have a producer originally, Lemaire, And it's kind of funny. He's no longer with them, and I'm not 100% sure the reasons, but he left, and maybe for his own reasons, whatever. But it's always funny. A lot of podcasts have a death of the producer. History Arenas did with Zach, and I guess Mike Mush too, Mike Suarez, and Venetia a little bit, and then Mikey. So they had a bunch of producers, and I'm sure other podcasts too that maybe I'm not paying as much attention to. But it seems like producers come and go. Even the Bigmark podcast. Here we are, without my buddy Christian behind the wheel. Those were the days. That was fun. Pull that shit up, Jamie. I guess he's one of the only ones who's stuck around. It's Jamie for Joe Rogan. But pull that shit up, Christian. Miss those days. Now Gardini's their producer now for the Secret Podcast. And, again, that's kind of the thing is that, podcasts, I think, go through eras. Like I said, even I mentioned the Joe Rogan podcast, the early days of it were very silly. It was kind of just a bunch of guys getting baked as fuck and talking shit, It was, and yeah, that still kind of exists today on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he's obviously talking to a lot more scholars and academia, people of academia and authors and thinkers, and then fighters and all that other stuff too. But there is always some type of beginning, middle, and end, or at least trajectory, let's put it that way, of a podcast. And I think, again, when you are doing a comedy podcast, you are treading these lines, these lines that are very dangerous to tread. And you're speaking in the context of a show, of a podcast that has an ebb and flow to it. But when you remove some of these words being said, or some of these jokes that are jokes, but some of these jokes that are being removed or clipped out of a podcast, it's not necessarily fair to the person. It's not necessarily an accurate representation of who they are. Now, in 2018, there was some major controversy. I was going to say a little bit of controversy, but there was some major controversy with the Matt and Shane Secret Podcast. And Shane straight up used some racial slurs to describe Asians. I think he used the C word. In the same episode, McCusker also actually made false claims that Chinese people invented MSG. So, again, not great, super not great, especially on paper here. Like, it's not good out of context. It's not acceptable to say in polite company for sure. But as Shane tells it, he was doing a character piece. He was pretending to be an Asian person and what they would say about others. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not necessarily justifying it. I support being able to say what you want to say when you're trying to be funny, and putting intention on someone's words that they say is something that you can't control. And yeah, they might be offended, but you can't control that. And they should understand that although I'm offending you, you shouldn't be in a position to ruin my career, shut me down, shut me up, anything. I mean, obviously there's lines. I understand there's lines, people everywhere. It's tough. This is really delicate conversation. But when you're truly mean it, you're not just saying, "Oh, I'm joking, I didn't mean that." No, when you're truly just making a joke and everyone's laughing. Everyone in that room is laughing. Everyone who's listening to the podcast is listening to the podcast to laugh, to have fun, and you're listening to it, or you're there hearing someone saying something, and you're there twisting that and saying, "This is bad. I don't care what all these people around me are laughing. It doesn't matter. What they're saying is bad, and they need to be punished." It's really tough because Shane was hired and then subsequently fired within a week from SNL because of this. He was hired at SNL. They looked back in his podcast. They found this shit, and they fucking fired him. So he was kind of canceled before he even started. And just a couple weeks ago, Shane just hosted SNL. Shane Gillis, he was fired. It's exactly like Norm Macdonald. At one point, he was fired, and now you're praising him. He's the host. You know, Norm Macdonald's scenario was a little bit different. It was a little bit different in the fact that they fired him because of what he was already saying when he was on the show. And he was told what he was saying wasn't funny. And then when he came back as a host, they have him there as a host for being funny. So that's extreme hypocrite. That's extreme hypocritical behavior. But again, it's just hard to look over the hypocrisy. And it's too bad that this overshadows so much. And again, I couldn't help but talk about it. But it comes from the podcast, and there's so many comedians out there that are using the podcast medium to push their craft, because it just kind of makes sense. You get to hear these guys talk. You get to hear them speaking in a little bit more long form. It's not just in 5-minute clips or in 45-minute bits or sets. You also learn that a lot of these comedians, it's a complete act. What they're doing on stage is nothing what they're like, but they're still interesting individuals, and they still have interesting things to say, and you might agree with a lot of the things that they say. And like I said, they're good at talking, so it makes sense that they're going to have a fucking podcast. And all these comedians have hours and hours and hours, a lot of them anyway, I mean, even I do, of content out there, things you said on the fly. Yeah, whether it's live or not, like not everyone's going through, unless your producer is mad, you're not going back and clipping up the whole fucking podcast, right? Like, I know I don't. Unless I say something wild, or like a guest says something fucking wild, but like that has like I said 3 times maybe has happened the whole time. So it's tough, because now and I believe this is leading towards kind of the end of cancel culture. I think Shane Gillis's whole story here, and I know we went off a bit of a tangent, but you know, it makes sense jumping off the podcast, but I think Shane Gillis is kind of marking a little bit of the end of cancel culture. I think I talked about this even in the episode that I did about Shane. But I think this whole scenario is so hypocritical. It's kind of opening people's eyes to like, okay, yes, there are some people that got canceled that definitely should have been canceled. But then there's a lot of people who probably shouldn't have. And then a person like Shane, we almost completely lost someone so funny and so talented. We almost completely lost them to the fucking underground world. Who even knows where some of these people go? But like, he has survived, you know, and yes, what he did was wrong, and it's racist, and like, it's not good to talk like that if you're being mean. But again, like, it's not like he did anything physical to anyone or hurt anyone directly. And he's talked about this, and he's came out about it, and I don't know if he's really like openly apologized for it, but again, he stood by his statement and realized that it wasn't good, but it's still in the context of, so again, I don't want to speak for Shane here. But again, there's just this whole idea that I think we need to kind of reevaluate who's getting canceled, how we cancel people, if we should, and understand that cancel culture has always existed in the sense that the people who are saying really wild shit, they'll eventually work their way down to the bottom. People will just ignore them. Again, it's like when you're on the fucking subway. Someone starts screaming in the car. No one's looking. You just fucking keep your eyes on your phone, turn your headphones up. Eventually they're going to yell themselves out, or eventually you're going to walk off the train. Yeah, when things step over the line, you're being individually physically abused. Yes, this sucks. I couldn't imagine anything like that, especially when it's out of your control. This is something you should never stand for. But again, ideas and words, these aren't things that are going to really, really injure us. And again, not allowing a bad idea to flash itself out, to kind of burn itself out really quickly and go away, by covering it up and guarding it and saying, no, you can't see that. You're almost stoking that flame. You're letting that small ember slowly start to grow to the point where people start hearing, oh, why are we holding this information? Why aren't you telling us about this? Maybe this is the truth. It's at least a different story than what you're telling us, and we're not buying what you're selling right now. And that's a dangerous game. So again, we live in this information age where so much information is available to us. Yes, it's sometimes hard to parse out, but we need to be taught how to parse out this information, the critical thinking, understanding that an idea is only that, and thinking about something, entertaining an idea without accepting it is the most important thing that we have to do, and it is the mark of an intelligent mind. But I truly believe it's the only way forward. It's the only way we could ever move forward and understand things with true nuance and true perspective. Thoughts, man, it's not really going to injure us. We can go in there. It's a safe realm. It's a safe arena of thought, and allow that to happen, and talk to people from different backgrounds. Talk to people who are into different things. That's the only way you're going to hear about some of this other stuff. If all you do is talk to your friends and talk to people that you know, you're just going to be talking about the same fucking shit. So, critically, thoughtfully, empathetically, with heart, approach ideas, approach other people, approach people with varying backgrounds from your own, and know that, yeah, maybe they're saying something that out of context is wild, or even in context is wild, or something that you've never heard or you think is bad. Hear them out a little bit more before you put your intention, before you put your own kind of spin on things. Try to take it down the road a little bit further. Entertain the thought, but you don't have to accept it. Check out Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. If you're still here listening and you liked what I had to say, let me know. Hit me up in the DMs, the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, YouTubes. Love y'all. See you soon. Peace.